Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first 100 Card Singleton podcast. We maybe have a name for it, AJ.
We're going to call it the Defibrillator podcast for 100 Card Singleton, because at this point, it's like 100 Card has been dead for a couple of years, but we want to try and bring it back to life.
A little bit shy. No, it's probably been dead for a couple of years. But
Either
we're gonna.
normally physicians, I think, in an emergency room or some other situation, they call the time of death. I think usually before a year and a half or so.
We're gonna shock this. I almost said a bad word. Back to life. Okay, so.
Yeah. So that's what we're doing here. I'm sure it sounds about as exciting as you can imagine from an episode of Chicago Hope. Or ER.
I was thinking ER. I mean, George Clooney was on that show.
Yeah.
So, a little about ourselves. We, Chris Cool and Planet Walls, AJ. Chris. That's AJ. Will, together with MTGO Academy, be hosting a 100-card singleton player run event called Vivat. I almost said Centum. Vivat Centum, or if you speak Latin, apparently it's Vivat Centum.
Well, in classical Latin, at least. I mean, what's interesting is that people don't even really know for sure how it was pronounced, but that's how I was taught it. They put it together from various grammars and poems, and they sort of have to infer. You guys don't care about this. So you can call it Vivat Centum if you want to sound stupid, and if you want it to be legitimate classical Latin.
I'm sure that there's an episode about Star Trek time travel where you get to hear its actual pronunciation.
That's
anyway,
right.
We've both been playing Magic for a long time. I started a little bit before or after Legends, I actually don't know. AJ, I know that you've been playing at least since Tempest.
4th edition and Ice Age were when I got my first packs, and I played some games around then. Scaled Worm was my best card.
I didn't have enough basics to cast a Scaled Worm, but we've been playing for a long time. I personally have played 100 Card Singleton since it became a format on Magic Online, and I was part of the organization from taking the format. They used to have these weekend events every 3 months, quarterly, and then just 4-player queues for 100 Card Singleton. And after a lot of polling and some emails to Mike Gills, I believe it was at the time, Wizards implemented 100 card, or not 100 card, but weekend challenges, and the format was played every week, which was awesome back in its heyday. But that lasted until I think the very end of 2010, and then they switched to dailies, presumably because they didn't like giving tons of QPs and loaded prizes to these weird events, and then everything but Popper died. So that's pretty sad. And I've also spent more man hours than I'd like to admit talking to Travis So Many Trolls Chance about deck lists on the phone, and probably just on the phone, not even on Skype. Okay, AJ?
Well, okay, so I played from the middle of 2010 to, I want to say maybe the beginning of 2011. The first quarter of 2011. I played 100 card during that time. Chris introduced it to me as a format that I would find interesting, and he was totally right about that. So I played in a couple of the last premier events that fired, as far as I know. And after that, they instituted a new banned list, and as Chris mentioned, they cut off the PE structure and replaced it with daily events that could never fire. And so I haven't played it as long as Chris has, but we talked about it pretty extensively and tried to resurrect the format once before.
AJ and I have also just played countless matches against each other, usually some lame deck that I have versus him playing a version of red, blue, green.
Yeah, that was my favorite archetype at the time. So before the banned list was instituted, and we can talk about this later, but I think the metagame shifted at exactly the same time that the format stopped being played readily, so it hasn't really been explored. But we can get to that. We can get to that later.
So our purpose of this podcast, first and foremost, is to promote the format 100 Card Singleton. I think that you'll get a good perspective of some of the nuances and all of the fun that you can have and the variety that it offers. And then we're going to spotlight our upcoming Player Run Event series. For those of you that don't know, Player Run Events are free to play, and they are hosted outside of the traditional like scheduled events, 2-player queues, 8-player queues on Magic Online. And then that's Vivat Centum, or Vivat Centum. I need to stop saying that every time I say it.
I'm going to say Vivat Centum from now on, because Vivat Centum, it just sounds so stupid. I just can't do it.
I agree. So you'll be able to find, with this podcast, a series of links, and the first link is to the Vivat Centum information page. And then we're also going to focus on both of our philosophies for 100 Card Singleton deck building, card interactions, the possible metagame, and kind of how you could expect to play in a game of 100 Card Singleton. It definitely varies between AJ and myself, and hopefully don't get too mired down in that section because there's a lot of information to talk about.
The whole point is to give you guys a chance to prepare for the PRE with a little bit of foresight as to how matches get played out and what you're going to have to be concerned about. Because I know countless times have I come up, loaded up Moto, and wanted to build a 100-card Singleton deck only to be overwhelmed by the millions of card options that are available. There are just so many that it's very difficult sometimes to even start building a deck. And so we want to provide at least some initial guidance or at least some empathy with respect to that matter, as well as beginning to play games. So, yeah.
I guess we'll delve right into this. The first topic, why 100-card Singleton? So ever since I saw a Magic Online user named Slurch, I believe it was, cast a Werebear off of Apocalypse Yavimaya Coast, which at the time was like 1 billion tickets in some basic land, to take his Treva-colored, well, Bant now, Tempo deck into a back and forth match against like some sort of Psychotog black-blue control deck on version 2 of Magic Online. I've just loved this format. Like watching the game, all the interaction, it was great. And I remember trying to build a budget version of Bomberman, which is the Auriok Salvagers recursion deck from Vintage, when Lion's Eye Diamond came online around this time. Like, I've just been thinking about Singleton ever since. Like, when I first got into it, the cards were really expensive though, so like a Fact or Fiction was $20, and it wasn't really realistic to start playing the format.
Right.
But it looked so much fun, and I loved it.
You mentioned that the first deck you built was a combo deck, right? This is always the funniest thing. And again, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but combo decks are somehow playable when you can just only run one of each combo piece.
Well, there are a lot of bad tutors.
Yeah.
But the sheer amount of different cards that you can play with allows you to play all sorts of strange, archaic cards that have been regulated to the sidelines. Like, I bet that if Psychotog was legal in Standard, it wouldn't see play. Like,
yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. Like, Psychotog being playable in a format like this is awesome. What other stuff's playable? Aquamoeba, probably. Wild Mongrel. I imagine both those are playable. Like, Wild Mongrel, when it came out, was the best bear ever printed. Remember, what was it? Like, Flores had to write an article about how obscene that is.
And it was pretty accurate, but also damage went on the stack, so that made it a little bit better. But yeah, Wild Mongrel was leaps and bounds better than the average Grizzly Bear converted mana cost 2 creature.
Yeah.
And now Wild Mongrel probably isn't playable.
Though in a 100 card, it probably is. At least
it's debatable.
In some decks, right?
Yeah. If you want cards to go to your graveyard, it's playable.
Right. And so the Madness archetype, for instance, like there's some old Madness cards, Fiery Violent Eruption.
Yeah.
Man, that card is a ball kick and a half. It's 4 ball kicks.
100 Card Singleton really allows you to explore the history of Magic and pair these old cards that were once All-Stars with Primeval Titan or Baneslayer Angel or Jace the Mind Sculptor, cards that that have come around recently and kind of defined how Magic is played now.
Yeah, like you can Elad Omri's call for those things, right?
Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
or natural order for them, or you can use some of
Worldly
the better.
Tutor.
Yeah, Worldly Tutor's a good one. You can pair some of these good creatures with the spells that you see in Legacy, or in Classic, or in Vintage. So it gives you a really, I would say unique, but I guess that cube kind of fills that void now. Anyway, it gives you a fun environment where you can go from the beginning of Magic to current times and really experience all of the different things it has to offer.
Yeah, so like the cube comparison is really good. Chris, like if I had to quote some people on this format, I would quote first of all Slug360 saying that there's no perfect deck in 100 Card Singleton, but then I would quote Chris, who has repeatedly told me, AJ, you got to try 100 Card Singleton. It's like playing Limited, and like the reason is that every draw feels exciting because of the variance in deck building. In cube is a great comparison, as I mentioned, because it feels like you're playing with these obscenely powerful cards that are situationally better or worse than one another sometimes. Obviously, cube is limited, right? Which is why 100 cards is kind of interesting, because you get to build this ridiculous deck with 100 cards, and it's just awesome. So, sorry to interrupt.
That actually kind of is a good point to springboard into another reason why I like 100 Card Singleton. Like Limited, you really have to manage your resources because you only have one of each card. So that means that, I mean, sure, cards are like functionally similar and you've got some graveyard recursion in a lot of the decks, but if you cast Bribery once and look through your opponent's deck and either you take like a Progenitus or maybe they have some sort of permanent that you need to deal with, so you take an Acidic Slime and get rid of a really oppressive land or an equipment. Once you've done that, odds are you're not going to be able to bribery them again and take the other option. So, like the Progenitus, and kill them.
Yeah,
And
so there's a degree of like resource management you have to engage in with unique threats, and that happens
or answers
really frequently. Right. You have to manage when you begin the game. You're like, okay, I have this Worldly Tutor in my hand. I can only use this Worldly Tutor once, right? And we can talk about this a bit later, but very rarely do you get a chance to recast your spells or cast functionally similar spells.
So every time that you play a card in 100 Card Singleton, that's it. So you really have to make sure that you are using the card for a purpose that you think is worthy. And it offers a fun, I guess, stress to the decision process. Stress isn't really a word that people attach with fun, I'm sure.
It's an adrenaline rush, really.
Yeah. A lot like drawing your bomb in Limited.
Yeah. Only every card's a bomb, but they still feel like bombs because they're only like uniquely good. Or most cards, they're best in a couple of different circumstances, and your opponents are all doing the same thing you are. So your Worm Coil engine is really exciting to draw, even if you're like, well, I hope my opponent doesn't have Dust to Dust, something. I don't know.
Well, so, I mean, Swords to Plowshares, or
I guess that's more likely.
Yeah, Path to Exile. And then also, like Limited, 100 Card Singleton has a ton of onboard interaction. It's not just like a fundamental turn 5 where you're goldfishing against the other deck. Like, you actually have to go into combat turn after turn in the mid game, manage your lands correctly, stop your opponent from assembling locks or combos of their own. Like, there's tons of interaction, and a lot of it is on the board.
And they're like morph creatures.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind.
They're playable morph creatures.
A lot of them. They're a fair number. There are at least like 10, I would go so far as to say.
And then you'll probably see like a good 5 of them regularly.
Yeah.
So you get this additional level of decision making in game. Like, that doesn't even count all the decision making that you have to make going into a tournament or a 2-man queue. So then We've compared 100 card singleton a lot to limited as a reason why it's so enjoyable. One thing that people cite when you're playing a big deck format is that there's a lot of randomness or variance to the format, and that can kind of be daunting to tackle if you're used to playing traditional constructed formats. If you play limited a lot, I guess you're probably used to it even if you hate it.
Even if the deck is only 40 cards long, or 40
Yeah,
cards 40 cards in length, deep.
I'd probably go deep, 40 cards deep.
Yeah,
But
40 cards high. There we go.
with this variance, you get some leeway in deck construction because you're never going to hit a perfect deck since the sequence of events that you play out through a game are just so, I hate to say variable, but my in-brain thesaurus is somewhat lacking right now.
Well, like this is something that we'll talk about later when we talk about strategy in a little bit more of a focused way.
Mm-hmm.
But there are multiple lines of play you can take in any game most of the time, and it depends on what your hand is and what your opponent is doing. But normally you're playing enough cards that serve multiple purposes or functions that you sort of have to make a decision early on in what line of play you're going to pursue. And so you try to take the variance that you're given and make something of it in sort of a strategically interesting way. You see what sorts of answers you have in your hand, and then you measure accordingly what threats you can play and the order of cards and what's important. Like sometimes you just really need one card to survive because it's such a good hoser in that matchup or something. And so it becomes a psychological game in a certain sense, which is pretty cool.
And one of the nice things about this format, to go back to the variance, is that since your deck is so large, and on an average game, you don't see the majority of it. I mean, most games will like go 20 or 30 cards deep. You do get to tutor quite a bit if you've built your deck that way, but you're not going to see all the cards. So if there's a card that's particularly narrow or that you're just really fond of playing and you want to play it, you can put it in your deck.
Yeah.
Like, you could only think of like one scenario out of 30 where this card would be good, but when it's good, it's great, and you just cackle like a maniac or giggle like a little girl or something.
This is how I operate all the time.
Yes. AJ maybe has too many of these cards in his deck. But
Right.
This is the format where you can get away with playing cards like that, and not only get away, but be rewarded.
Yeah. One other thing, like I want to say in tandem with that point, is the comparison to Commander, which we should talk about a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So in Commander, people will often play decks that I don't want to say are comical, but you can express yourself in different ways in your Commander decks in conjunction with whoever you've selected as your Commander. The formats are similar in a couple of ways. You have 100-card singleton decks essentially. Not having access to a powerful legend and not being restricted to certain color identities of cards really makes a huge difference, as does playing against only one opponent. And it's really a different experience, even if there are some deck building similarities.
And you only start with 20 life.
Oh, thank God, right?
So you can't just kind of play solitaire for the first couple turns. You have to be prepared to interact with creatures attacking you.
Yeah, it really means the format is different. Even if you can express some of your like individual creativity in terms of trying to incorporate certain threats or answers that border on the comical within your deck. Whenever I say that word, I just can't stop thinking about the card Ixodron, which I guess we can mention later.
Talk about. Yeah.
I don't think there is any funnier card in the history of Magic, but I mean, we can get to that later.
So because it's a big deck format, you can play cards like Ixodron, and that's fantastic, especially if you have a creative deck building streak. I think that this is probably a good time to focus on the player run event, Vivat Centum.
Yeah, so Vivat Centum, right? I'm just going to go over this briefly. We do have a link below to the page where we originally discussed this. But just to go over some of the tournament details really briefly. We have 3 tournaments scheduled now, and they're 8-player minimum. So if 8 people don't show up, we're not going to be able to run them. But I don't foresee that being a problem. They're free to play. though we totally appreciate donations, and they go directly to the prize pool. Each tournament will consist of only of 3 rounds of Swiss pairings, and so the idea is to make sure that you guys have enough time to play in them, especially if you're on the other side of the world from us. We want to make sure that we're not asking for too much of a commitment, especially when the format is new to you. Mm-hmm. And in these rounds, you play one-on-one, just like standard matches, and the best 2 games out of 3, per match, just like a normal tournament. And they're going to be 30-minute matches each. And you have to make them open to spectators, but some of these particular rules we can deal with a little bit later. I should talk about prizes and who gets them.
Yeah, the exciting part.
Yeah, so the prizes are as follows. We, MTGO Academy, will be donating 40 event tickets of bot credit usable at our Sell Bot and Buy Bot series, which we can post a link to below, or post. I suppose we'll just post.
It's in the original post that is linked below, so we should be good.
And we'll also be donating 1 event ticket of bot credit per player enrolled in each tournament. So this means that if 32 participants play in one of the tournaments, we'll be donating 72 event tickets of bot credit to that prize pool. In addition to that, we will be accepting donations from players, as I said before, and all the event tickets that players or other parties donate will go directly to that prize pool to be distributed among the quote-unquote winners of the event, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And donors and anybody who donates will have their names and donations highlighted. So if you want to be a celebrity,
or at least be appreciated by this soon-to-be fledgling community,
absolutely. So real quick, I'll say when the tournaments are, and then I'll continue the prize discussion to talk about how the prizes are distributed per tournament. The first one will be on November 17th, 2012. It'll be 10 a.m. Pacific time. So that's the time for Wizards of the Coast.
Mm-hmm.
That's equivalent to 1800 UTC. The second tournament will be December 1st, 2012 at 3 p.m. PST or 2300 UTC. And the third and final scheduled tournament, and after these are over, maybe we'll want to schedule some more if there's some success, which I think we expect there to be, right?
Yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah. I imagine people will show up. It's a free-to-play tournament, and it's kind of an exciting, weird format. But December 15th, 2012 is the third tournament we have scheduled, and that'll be at noon PST or 2000 UTC. 20. I don't even know how to say military time once you get above
2000.
2000, that 2000.
Yeah.
Whatever. So prize distribution. We wanted to set this up such that it didn't take up everyone's day when they wanted to play in this. So it's set up kind of like a daily event, the way the prizes are distributed. 45% of the total primary prize pool, and that's the event tickets and bot credit, donated and supplied by us, will be distributed evenly among players who achieve a 3-0 win record, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all 3 of your rounds, you get some of that prize pool. And 55% of the prize pool will be distributed evenly among the players who achieve a 2-1 record. So again, this is like a daily event. If you go 4-0 in a daily event, you get a different prize than if you go 3-1. But there are more 3-1 players for the prize to be distributed across.
Or in this case, 2-1 players.
Yeah. In this case, it's 2-1 and 3-0. So hopefully the prizes are distributed in a way that at least we think is fair and pretty good for a free-to-play tournament. Finally, there are going to be secondary prize pool, and if you're donating something like individual foil cards, I think we'll have an interest in turning those into the secondary prize pool.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be distributing almost like random door prizes. So if you show up for the whole tournament and you're there, even if you lose horribly,
you could still get a random prize.
Yeah, it's totally still worth playing these weird games, and you'll be playing against other good players who just happen to lose maybe sometimes. So it'll be worth your time, and hopefully you can walk away with a random door prize of some quality. So, if you have any questions about the actual tournament structure, go ahead and see the post that we've linked below, or post as a comment here, and feel free to ask anything. So I think now we want to transition to some of the strategy portion of the podcast here, and we're going to look at deck building first for 100 Card Singleton.
Since assembling 100 or more unique Magic the Gathering cards can be quite daunting, especially when they have to come together in a cohesive deck, AJ and I have put together a guide to talk about the general plan to build a 100-card deck, and then we explore a couple different areas like actual card selection or individual card selection and card selection with a nod to what you can expect to play later.
Yeah, so again, this isn't like a hard and fast set of rules. It's more just like the technique that Chris and I use in order to make the process seem a little bit less intimidating. And to narrow down your options in a way that reflects how much time you have to build a 100-card singleton deck normally.
So you start out pretty basically. Just figure out what you want to do with your deck. Do you want to attack? Do you want to combo off? Do you want to control the game for a little bit and grind your opponent away, or in the game in a big bang? Like kind of a very basic way to look at it is, do I want to be an aggro deck? Yes. What type of aggro deck? Do I want to play red? Do I want to play green? Do I want to play white? This kind of brings you into figuring out what colors you want to play to enact your strategy. You can kind of think about how much risk you're willing to take during this point too, because the more colors you play, generally the more variance you're going to have with your deck.
Yeah, but by that same token, sometimes you have more trouble answering your opponent's spells, for instance, or providing a variety of threats.
Yeah, if you're just mono red, especially mono red is a good example for that, because a lot of the sideboard cards are insane against mono red.
Yeah.
And if you're red-green, then you've got gigantic green creatures to attack past, like a Sphere of Law.
Right.
During this stage, it's also a good point to figure out the core of your deck. Tarmatog, or Naoto, depending on which account he's playing on, wrote a wonderful article on Pure MTGO, which we actually have the link below this podcast, so you can go, or you should go and check it out, where he talks about assembling deck cores. It's kind of a unique way to think about building a 100-card singleton, and I think it's a good idea, especially for the more complex decks. Like he, as AJ mentioned to me as we were getting this podcast planned together, he does a really good job talking about like the Hermit Druid combo deck, which we will also mention later.
Yeah, and what cards you absolutely need to include in the combo and to make sure that combo goes off with the sort of efficiency you need. And then from there, you sort of ask yourself different sorts of questions. And
yeah, which we'll also hit. So once you have your core defined, and then the way that I tackle it is I just start adding almost every card I can think of that I would possibly want to play in this deck, or I think that the deck would need to play. I know that AJ does that too, because he'll always be talking to me about 100-card singleton decks and then just go, I have 238 cards.
That's exactly how it works. I'm like, this will be easier because I have 100 cards, not just 60 to fit in this deck, and you can only run one of each, right? Like in a normal standard deck, you have what, like 9 to 15 card slots, essentially?
Something like that. Where you're playing a lot of 4-ofs, and then beyond that you've got some weird variable slots.
But somehow you can still find a way with 100-card singleton to have 250 cards sitting in your deck editor, and you're just sitting there staring at them. Odo can barely load them all.
It's probably worth suggesting that finding a deck-building partner to shoot ideas off of is very helpful, because it's usually a lot easier for someone else to look at your list and just say, cut this, cut this, cut this.
Yeah.
So after you've assembled this massive pile of cards, if you're going about it this way, something else as a quick aside is you can just take a deck that someone else has built and then add the cards that you would like to see in the deck that either they didn't include or have been printed since, and then cull down. And that's a much quicker way of doing this. But you take out cards from this massive pile of contenders that you've assembled until you have roughly like 66 or 58 cards, because you want somewhere around 40% of your deck to be land. I've never really played a deck, I think, below 34 mana sources, but rarely do I go over 40, even though I've seen decks that play like 42, 44 lands.
Yeah, and I mean, often decks will be playing things that are, like pseudo lands, either artifact mana
Yeah,
sources or creatures that produce mana or spells that find lands or draw cards.
and lands that are pseudo spells,
Yeah, yeah,
which we get into a little bit deeper into this podcast. And when you're cutting down your deck, the main things you want to consider are your mana curve. It's very easy to be top heavy, which AJ and I'm sure hit a couple more times, or we will hit a couple more times.
definitely.
The big thing that we talked about was 4 versus 5 drops, but I don't want to spoil everything at once. And then what tutor targets you want to have, because the tutors in a 100 card are one of the most important things that you have. So you want to make sure that whatever they're going to go fetch will get you out of the situations that you think you're going to find yourself into. You want to make sure that you're not taking out any of those primary cards that you built in the core. Like if you make the Hermit Druid deck and you take out Dread Return, then you're going to be pretty sad when you're playing a game. This this is actually kind of a funny story that I don't think I've ever mentioned to AJ, but
I'm all ears.
one of the gentlemen that helps out with the technical side of MTGO Academy was playing in a modern PTQ last season, so the first modern PTQ season. And he was a big proponent of the blue-white Urzatron deck. That's just like blue-white control with the Urza lands, so you get lots of mana and you can cast stuff like Wormcoil Engine or Mindslaver or Karn. I can't remember all of the targets that version of the deck played. But it had Gifts Ungiven, and then Unburial Rites, and an Elish Norn, and maybe an Iona. So it had like this Reanimator package. And he rebuilt the deck the night before and forgot the Unburial Rites. Yeah. You do not want that to happen when you're cutting cards from your deck.
Yeah, it's actually easy when you're sideboarding too.
Yeah, to accidentally cut one of the key cards.
Yeah,
Or like a key card for a scenario.
right.
And then you also want to make sure that you're not taking away cards that you added to that gigantic pile because you were considering what your opposition was likely to be, or just to interact with the different types of opposition that you're likely to come up upon.
Yeah,
And then also don't take out too many of your threats, because you've got 100 cards to go through and you don't want to spend half the game just trying to find a way to win. It's miserable.
yeah. So I mean, essentially, once you cut your deck down to a certain number of cards, though, to make sure you have enough room for a mana base, essentially, figuring out the mana base can also even be kind of daunting. There are tons of non-basics that are good, and of course, there's also non-basic hate, which I think forever keeps basic lands totally excellent in 100 card.
Unless you're playing the Hermit Druid deck, you probably want to play at least one basic of every color in your deck.
Yeah, almost assuredly. You have to watch out about Blood Moon,
Yeah.
Magus of the Moon, Dust Bowl, tons of stuff.
Wasteland, Tectonic Edge,
Yeah,
Rise of Progress,
Ruination,
Dwarven Miner,
Back to Basics,
Primal Order.
Dwarven Blast Miner.
I don't know if you actually have to worry about Primal Order. But yeah,
I don't even know what card that is.
I'm thinking of a card that's 4 green, and it does X damage to each player during their upkeep, where X is the number of non-basic lands, and it's an enchantment. It's from, like,
Are you sure you're not thinking of Sky Shroud Warbeast?
No, that's a star guy for a 1 and a green, where star is the number of non-basics your opponent has.
So basically that guy's better than Tarmogoyf. That's what you're saying.
Stop putting words into my mouth, AJ. Yeah, so like once you actually have your spells figured out, then you have to figure out the mana base. With variants, you need to make sure that you're just playing enough lands that you can get to whatever number of mana you need to cast the majority of the spells in your deck.
Yeah.
And then you also have to make sure that you have the right caller, which is a lot harder when you can only play one of each of the best lands.
Oh man, if your opponent gets out Knight of the Reliquary, you have to assume that at least one of your lands is going to get blown up by a wasteland. Right? And so this is the other problem, is that I guess I always play assuming that before turn 5, one of my lands is going to be destroyed.
Which is why we have a hard time dealing with the 5-drops.
Yeah.
Figuring out what 5-drops to play. But the focus of your deck building, like, you should probably put almost equal effort into just tweaking your mana. And after you play some test games, go back and change it again based on the empirical evidence of those games, because you want to make sure that you can cast your spells, and it requires more effort in this format than most, but you also get to do really funny things with your land too.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, you can play lands, colorless lands, and color-producing lands that you've probably forgotten about. There's an entire cycle of ally-colored dual lands. I use dual with scare quotes. From Odyssey block.
I was going to say, are you going to talk about Mossfire Valley?
Yeah, do you guys remember those lands? I bet you don't.
I just played Sungrass Prairie against AJ the other day.
And I laughed out loud, and then it blew me out because I had a Rashadan Port in play, and I couldn't tap down his lands. I mean, if you'd had, like, the equivalent of, what is it, Mystic Gate? I don't know what the white-green one is off the top of my...
Wooded Bastion.
Yeah, but, like, I couldn't port you out in the way that I wanted to. It was pretty disappointing. Yeah, so, I mean, your mana bases will look funny, too, and so there are a bunch of cards you could probably buy for a nickel online.
Yeah, Pain Lands, those Filter Lands.
You want to be a contender? All those are contenders. You got to think about all those guys.
City of Brass, Tendo Ice Bridge.
Oh man, I forgot about Tendo. What about Lantern Lit Graveyard?
No, I don't think that's playable.
I don't think those guys are playable either, but they're awfully funny. Vec Township? Nope. Lotus Vale? Nope. So anyway.
Yeah, it's worth just taking a long look at all of the different, especially rare lands in Magic's history, and seeing what you should be considering for your deck.
Yeah, and it's actually just more fun than you would ever expect it to be. At least I think it is, but maybe you guys don't. But moving on real quick, I sort of want to bracket this next issue for a second. So we were going to talk about tweaking main deck and sideboard options then, given certain metagame considerations or what you expect to find in the field, and we're definitely going to talk about that in a minute. But I want to say something real quick about... first of all, I don't know what you'd call this. You'd call it like packets, deck building packets. At a certain point in your deck building, you realize that certain cards are interconnected with one another, not necessarily by way of combos, but some form of synergy, such that if you're no longer including one card in your deck, another one becomes much weaker.
Now,
tutors are especially relevant, right?
Yeah, this is probably a good time to also highlight another one of the links.
Sure.
Slug 360's article, I believe that he kind of talks about this when he's talking about cards that have overlap between different styles of tutors.
Yeah.
Like, Duplicant is a creature, so you can find it with a Laddermaid's Call and Worldly Tutor, but it's also a creature... Or what?
Primal Command.
Yeah. All those style of tutors. But it's also a creature that has... power of 2 or less, so you can find it with Imperial Recruiter, which is one of the better red tutors available in 100 Card Singleton.
And it's also artifacts. You can find it with Fabricate or maybe Tezzeret.
Or Enlightened Tutor, which is the one that I was going to say. But these packages of tutors, like if you have a card that gives you an option, which is where AJ was going with this,
right,
to search your deck, then you want to have a set package of different cards to deal with different situations.
And if you start cutting parts of those packages, the entire package becomes weaker.
Yes, it makes having an Enlightened Tutor a lot worse if you cut the Duplicant from your deck.
Or if you cut the Sphere of Law from your sideboard.
Yeah.
Instance. Another instance would be, it's not necessarily tutor related, but something like Thirst for Knowledge. Every artifact you cut from your deck before you hit your final deck that you arrive at will make the Thirst for Knowledge worse. And also, cutting the Thirst for Knowledge will make those artifacts worse.
Yeah.
Especially a card like Chrome Mox, for instance.
Or just cards that are pretty narrow, like Relic of Progenitus.
Yeah. Um, I'm sure that there are other considerations. For instance, there are other things. Let's say you think in the metagame that killing non-basic lands is good, and that's true most of the time.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, Magus of the Moon becomes better, and if that becomes your coherent, one coherent line of play that you can approach the game, then Dwarven Miner and Dwarven Blast Miner also become good.
Yeah.
But as you begin to cut those, you have to just recognize that you're adding variance to your deck's line of play, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But if you're really going for a certain strategy, you oftentimes want to maximize that strategy. Madness cards are an instance of this. Once you cut all the Madness cards from your deck, your Thought Courier and your Merfolk Looter start looking a lot worse.
Yeah, the issue with redundancy, which we're going to get into just here in a second, but on a much more narrow view. But just having redundancy in your deck for general card interactions usually will make your deck play out a lot more strongly than if you just have like one Madness card and 3 looter effects like Merfolk Looter. Or if you have like 8 artifacts and 1 Thirst for Knowledge and 1 Tezzeret, or something like that, and
Right.
1 Fabricate. Because once you hit like a critical mass with this this like
I don't know what you'd call it either.
strategic redundancy,
Yeah.
then your deck just starts performing better.
Yeah, it's not to say that you can't include one-ofs or strategic options that aren't as consistent. It's just that every time it becomes a question of whether the opportunity cost of running those cards is too great. So once I cut most of the artifacts from my deck and I only have 5, maybe a card is better than Thirst for Knowledge at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want to say it's all or nothing, but just that there are a lot of gains and losses you have to consider every time you cut an individual card. So this is something I have to do whenever I tweak a deck by 1 card. It's always a good idea to go back through and make sure that what I've done makes sense. Because maybe the entire reason I had that Viridian Shaman in my deck was so that I could Imperial recruit for it in addition to Green Sun Zenith for it. And now that I've put what's the 3/2 human?
You're thinking of Viridian Renegades, I think?
Yeah, if I find that card, I'm like, why haven't I been playing Viridian whatever or something? It's like a 3/2 that does the same thing as Viridian Shaman, but then I realize I can't Imperial recruit it.
Yeah.
And so you just need to consider those sorts of things every time you make a small decision.
Another card that's kind of funny is Chrome Mox, which seems like a pretty narrow card in a 100 deck format, or a 100 card format. But if you're playing lots of cards that, as part of their resolution, requires you to discard a card, you don't really care about playing a certain number of narrow cards.
Yeah.
But once you start taking out these draw and discard cards to improve your card quality, the more narrow cards that you have in your deck become much worse because you're not getting any mileage out of them if you draw them in the wrong scenario.
Right. And so these are all things to consider. The other point I wanted to make very briefly, and I'll honestly make this one briefly, is that it's hard to empirically test your deck. Like, this is something that Chris mentioned with respect to Manabases, and I think that's the best way to do it. It's the most consistent way to test your deck. But something that's hard to do in 100 card is to build your deck and play it enough times to get a sense if that one card you swapped was worth it.
Mm-hmm.
When you're doing something like that, the easiest way to think about it is to ask yourself how frequently you want to tutor for that card. Or in the instance of a sideboard card and something like a Burning Wish, how frequently you want to wish for that card. And so the best way to test situations like that is anytime you're using a tutor or have access to a tutor, ask yourself which cards you wished would be in your deck that would be available for that tutor. And it's sort of a way to force yourself just to ask that question every time you find a card, rather than just playing out games and seeing if your deck is improved in general.
Yeah, so instead of just like which is the best option in my deck, what card do I actually want for this scenario? And then if you have it in your deck, you get it. But if you don't, make a note. Maybe it should be in your deck.
Yeah, And then, I mean, sometimes you'll want a card that you know exists, but which is so rarely useful that you never actually want to put it in your deck.
Decimate. Decimate.
Decimate is always the card that I always want to do something with. I always want a Burning Wish for a Decimate and just destroy every significant permanent on their side of the board. And I always make a mental note when I would like to Decimate, but I've never done that.
Well, it also turns out that usually when he wants to cast Decimate, he could also just Burning Wish for Scape Shift and win the game.
Yeah, that's probably true too. I actually think there's one time that I cast Decimate in a premiere event, but it involved killing one of my own artifacts. and sure, you know, like so that's like a 3 for 2 in my favor, but still, it's not very good.
Do you think that this is a good time to transition to looking at individual cards for a deck?
Yeah, I think we
Did
could.
you have anything else that you wanted to mention?
So, I guess I could say this briefly too. When we were talking about tweaking the main deck or sideboard for certain metagame considerations, like I guess what we just want to highlight, and I'll say this again pretty quickly, is just that most decks, yours and your opponents, are going to be running probably a variety of threats and answers. This is even the case with some pretty linear deck like Goblins. All these decks actually have a variety of ways that they can win the game. And it's very hard to sort of discern what your opponent's up to. But preparing for situations in which you can blow out your opponent by surprising them with something, I think are often good situations. So Price of Progress is a card that, I don't know, is it in the main deck in Goblins? Probably is.
Yeah, it is.
That's something your opponent can have as like this trump card, and they can play around it in a different way, and you may not be prepared for it. The example that I used to use, and I no longer think this card is playable in the current 100 card, but it's Ixodron, which of course I already mentioned. There's really no card that does the same thing as that, and so having access to it in your deck, I used to play basically one Ixodron and one clone. This was before Phantasmal Image and Phyrexian Metamorph were around.
Yeah.
And it was basically a trump card. They were both creatures that you could access with Imperial Recruiter, Worldly Tutor, Fauna Shaman, Primal Command, Survival of the Fittest when that was legal, to deal with your opponent's progenitus.
Or if in Ixodron's case, you could deal with Proj, and if they had just a lot of creatures that were pretty good, you could deal with those too. So you got options from it, like some overlap in what it does.
Yeah, so I mean, it's weird, right? Because there's no card that's like that. It's almost like a humility, but it also turns your Imperial Recruiter, if you used it to tutor for it, or like a wall, into attackers. And so the card Ixodron, not very good, especially not anymore when you just have 5-drops that are tons better.
Yeah.
And you also have access to Phantasmal Image and Metamorph, which can be tutored for the same cards to answer the same progenitus question.
Mm-hmm.
But my point is, those sort of unique answers or unique threats might offer you not only a psychological advantage, but a strategic advantage on the board in a lot of different matchups, given that you have that option with a tutor in your hand. Something to consider. So, I mean, yeah, we can transition to card-by-card considerations now if you're ready for that.
There's just like a sickening feeling in my gut that you will try to play Ixodron again at some point. But anyway, the way that you approach actual individual card choices in 100 Card Singleton is a little bit different than normal formats. And this is mostly due to variance, and this is what AJ means by card-by-card considerations. Just looking at each individual card. Because since, back to variance, like, I should just say due to variance issues instead of trying to rehash everything that we've said before. Like, you're always going to need to interact with a variety, or you're always going to be able to... I'm just tripping over all of my words here.
Well, you're going to need to be able to cope with a variety of situations that you can't quite predict.
Thank you, AJ.
Be aware of your opponent's possible lines of play when possible, but you can't really... You can't look at your opening hand and say, am I prepared to deal with every opponent's going to throw at me?
Yeah,
right?
But you can have a card in your hand that has a decent amount of options.
That's exactly what I'm talking about here. Redundancy and then cards that provide you special sorts of flexibility in themselves.
Yeah, so just the ways that I approach fighting variance when I'm building a deck. The number one is redundancy, where if I have an effect that I really like, I look for all the cards that have that effect, and the casting cost seems reasonable for that effect. So just like a very simple example would be Arc Lightning and Flames of the Firebrand, which are just the same card with different names.
Yeah.
Or like Loxodon Hierarch, Obstinate Baloth, Thragtusk, Centaur Healer, where they're not all functionally the same card, but they're pretty similar. They give you life. They're a big creature.
Yeah.
Tutors, obviously, to search your deck for exactly what you want, given that you've set your deck up to give you a lot of juicy targets, kind of the package creation that we talked about earlier. Just normal card drawing, because if you draw, let's say you can draw your whole deck, you're going to find the card that you want that's in your deck.
Yeah, so it increases the odds
Yeah.
you're going to find whatever you need.
Yeah. And then what I alluded to before I got tongue-tied, modal cards. Probably the number one modal card that I can think of is always going to be Cryptic Command, because that card just gets you out of so many dumb situations.
Right.
Like I bet that the number of back-breaking times that it's cast are mostly just due to the fog effect, where it taps,
Which is
the Alpha
easily
Strike.
the worst effect it offers in
Yes,
general.
Yes, but just the fact that you can play a Dismiss in your deck that occasionally falters your opponent so they can't block you, or fogs them so they can't do any damage to you, is insane.
What are some other cards that do something similar besides obvious examples like Is It Charm,
Yeah,
or Selesnya Charm, or Croesus's Charm?
yeah.
There are cards like Jace the Mind Sculptor. That
Yeah,
guy's essentially a toolbox in himself.
yeah, all of the Planeswalkers are very modal.
Yeah.
Especially because it seems that Wizards has designed them to offer effects that aren't related to each other. Like occasionally two of their effects will be related, and then the third one is completely different. Like Gideon, he's got these two super defensive, and then his last ability is he turns into a 6/6 and just ends the game.
Yeah. There's also like a Johnny Vengeance, which is interesting because it either slowly deals with threats, or it can eliminate something right off the bat and force your opponent to deal with it anyway.
Yeah.
And then it poses the threat of Armageddon.
Oh, that's a miserable threat to impose.
I hate playing against that.
So when you play cards like this, you just get a lot of value from the different options that they allow you in a game. And
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting to think about the idea of modal card design and then expand upon like the choose one, choose two clearly modal cards. One example that I've been thinking about recently is a card that scales with the amount of mana that you have.
Yeah.
Like Fireball or Stroke of Genius.
Banefire is a good example because
Yeah.
it's either a removal spell or it's a game finisher that can't be countered.
And it mostly depends on the phase of game that you're in. If it's the early game, or if your opponent has played like a must-answer threat, it's a removal spell.
Yeah.
And if you top deck it after you've played like a 15-turn attrition game, it's your win condition.
And then you just feel really good that you have it in your deck, or that you Burning Wished for it.
And then there are other cards that are modal like this that get better with the amount of time that has occurred.
Venser, Shaper Savant is a good example. Like, that
Well,
either trades with a guy and gives you a little tempo.
Well, he's modal, but it's like a different style.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he's like a combo piece with Caracas
Well,
in
like,
some ways.
all of pretty much any card that is enter the battlefield creature is somewhat modal, because you get the creature and then you get the effect that it has when it enters the battlefield. Then you also have strange cards like Knight of the Reliquary will almost always get better over time because more cards or more lands will go to the graveyard, or
Yeah.
cards that get better with triggers like Vinelasher Kudzu.
And that card's perfect. Not Kudzu, which is a decent card, but Knight of the Reliquary controls the game by basically allowing you certain land management. It
Yes.
improves your draws by thinning your deck, and
Then eventually
then
just
it
wins
ends
the game. Yeah. Which especially it's interesting with cards like Kesig Wolf Run, where you can sit there. It can play defensively, shut down your opponent's attackers, get a wasteland, get a tectonic edge, stifle their mana development, or kill some man lands or some good utility lands, and then find Kessig Wolf Run and attack for a ton trample.
Oh, and even the possibility of having Sajiri Step in your deck.
Yeah, there's all sorts of weird lands that you can, or like Bajukabog, which...
Oh man, that's backbreaking.
But those are the sort of package additions that you really have to think about, because they've got decent amount of drawback, which is it's basically a basic land that comes into play tapped and is non-basic instead of being basic.
Right.
But these modal cards go a long way in increasing your options and maintaining...
I just thought of another one. Zoetic Cavern?
Yes.
Is it a creature? Is it a land? Is it mana ramp?
Well, any land that has an ability is somewhat modal too, because you get the... if it produces mana, I should say. Because you get the effect of just hitting a land drop, adding additional mana to your mana pool, or whatever pseudo spell effect the card gets. So, that's these are all things that you should think of when you're building a deck, and a good rule of thumb is a card that gives you more options is going to be a little bit better if like the cost is the same and one of the options is similar or the same.
Yeah.
Like, why would you ever play, I guess, like a Grey Ogre when you could play a Trinket Mage if the color of the creature is of no matter to you?
Right.
So that's probably the number one thing that I think of when I'm actually just looking at individual cards. But you want to make sure that if you're including a card in your deck, that if it isn't going to win you the game, stop you from losing the game, that it's going to find a card that does something like that.
There's a rule that I've heard for screenwriting.
This should be
for that you should never have a scene in your film or television show or whatever that doesn't have some bearing on some other scene. So if you find there's one and it has no connection whatsoever to another, you cut it. It's almost like that, unless the card is just so powerful on its own right.
Yeah, and that might have been something like Mind Twist.
Yeah.
Where,
but then again, most decks that ran Mind Twist, you could Mystical Tutor for it.
Like the only deck that I could think that couldn't tutor for it would be Elves.
Yeah.
Which just could cast it so early that it was like
didn't matter.
It was like another Armageddon in that deck. But that's pretty good logic too. You want to make sure that the cards have some sort of connection to the deck as a whole, if you're including them. AJ and I, we got together, wrote some rough drafts, draft roughs of this, and he brought up a really good point related to deck building, but taking it one stage beyond deck building, and that's playing with the deck and taking that information into account both before you play and after you play.
Okay, so in terms of like playing a 100 card singleton deck, it can be really frustrating if you haven't had a lot of time to practice with it. And a perfect time to practice with it is actually in one of these free-to-play player-run events. So if you don't have a chance before the tournament to really sink into it and feel like it's your deck and you know exactly what to do in every circumstance, that's okay. It's free, right? Mm-hmm. But as much as possible, you need to take time to play just against a variety of opponents, or just any opponent, to realize the sorts of options you want to have at any given point and what options you need to actualize. So this is often the case. You look at your opening hand, and let's say you're running a deck that has some green mana ramp, like some Llanowar Elves. You'll have a hand that has a Llanowar Elves, a couple of lands, and then a green Sun Zenith. And the question is, do you use this green Sun Zenith soon to help ramp, let's say in turn 1 to find a Dryad Arbor, or maybe turn 2 to find a Birds of Paradise, or something, whatever you don't have in your hand? Or do you wait until late game when it's a huge threat? This isn't uniquely different than in Standard, except in 100 card, you've only got that one card with you. And there are 100 cards in your deck, and you may have 5 other tutors, but they might not replicate the green Sun Zenith in an important way. And so considering the variation that you have, it's very important to decide, I would say, early on in the game, when you want to use your green Sun Zenith, and to keep reevaluating that option as the game state changes until you cast it. The other question then is, once you do cast it, you have to be very careful about what you want to find from your deck, right? Worldly Tutor is actually kind of a better situation.
Because it doesn't require mana to change your selection.
So let's say you've got a 1-land or maybe a 2-land hand, and you've got a Worldly Tutor. You have Mana Elves in your deck, right? Is it worth it to Worldly Tutor for a Mana Elf and then know you're missing your land drop in order to cast it to ensure your land drop, your quote-unquote land drop? It's a tough question.
Or like an
Go ahead.
Enlightened Tutor for a Signet or a Seat of the Synod or something.
Yeah, so that's a perfect example, because Enlightened Tutor could find you, say, a combat piece, a serious answer, a creature, or maybe you just want to make sure you smooth out your draws in the early game. Like, every time you make one of these decisions, it's hard, and it's never certain. The other thing is actually picking the card you want to find when you've got a list of possible threats to find, when, for instance, with a Worldly Tutor. And practice makes perfect in this. Sometimes you'll be sitting there with your Worldly Tutor, and you'll flip back to your deck list, and you realize there are just 100 cards looking at you. They're all different. And as the list populates or whatever, you're still thinking, what the hell do I Worldly Tutor for here? Like, I've got this opportunity. What sort of win con do I want to go for? And just even knowing what sort of lines of play are available as you start the game is incredibly important.
Well,
for
to you and your opponent. Or
Yeah.
For you and for your opponent.
Right. So you can ask yourself questions like this, for instance. Like, what's my opponent doing right now? Let's say he stumbled early on in the game and didn't drop something for the first 2 turns, or he missed a land drop. Does that mean he's going to play a natural order and turn it into a Progenitus? Like, because if you think he's playing in such a way he's going to do that, or maybe he's playing to Armageddon.
Yeah.
Figure out what his line of play is that made it attractive for him to keep that hand. Or at least try to figure it out. Because your opponent has a very particular line of play that he's probably pursuing that's dependent upon what he drew in his opening hand. Because of the variation of your deck, you don't exactly know what he's going to be doing. You just need to make sure you have a plan yourself.
Like an elf deck might want to cast Armageddon once its opponent's played its 3rd land, or it might want to hit every land drop it can until it can hard cast Woodfall Primus.
Yeah. Or what's that green guy that draws a card for each green creature? The 7
Regal Force.
Yeah, Regal Force. That guy. That guy's ruined so many of my days. Sometimes it just wants to keep enough lands out so that it can just drop a mirror entity and win the game immediately.
Yeah. But you don't really know, like, before the game starts. You just have to get clues off of what your opponent's doing. Like, one of them might be that on turn 2, they don't play a second land, and they, like, cast 2 more elves.
Yeah. Does that mean they're going to Gutton you, or does it just mean they have a hand that doesn't have land?
That just has 1 land and a bunch of mana elves.
So there's a degree of risk assessment that goes in. It's very easy to say, like, I'm not worried my opponent is going to get me. Wrath of God. Play a Damnation. Play an Inferno Titan. Because they've only got 1 in their deck. But the wise opponent will hold on to whatever tutors they have until they know they're going to break your back with them. A la Bane and Batman. Or,
do a Batman voice, hold on.
oh my god, he's going to break my back. That sucked.
I can't even remember what we were talking about last time we did Batman voices. But yeah, so the wise opponent isn't going to expend their options immediately until they know that they're making, like, the killing blow or the strongest punch.
But yeah. So just in some ways you have to be kind of conservative with the way that you play out your threats until you figure out what your opponent's line of play is. And in other times you're playing a deck maybe where you can't afford to do that. Or you have a hand where you can't afford to do that. And it's just obvious you want to play out all your guys and hope to win that way. It depends on the situation. The bottom line was You just want to make sure that you are aware of what lines of play are available to you as you draw your opening hand. You need to ask yourself, how am I going to win this game? And given what my opponent is playing, how is he probably planning on winning this game? Like, what are his options? Natural order is just a great example because when you're playing to expect your opponent to natural order, sometimes you want to burn off their green creatures, even if it doesn't otherwise look like a good time to do it.
Yeah, like you could
Risk them not hitting it, though.
Yeah, but I mean, you could be trading, developing your ability to end the game by casting a good threat, like a 4 or 5 mana threat, or casting like a 2 mana removal spell just to make sure that they don't untap with a green creature and 4 mana.
And the green creatures that they sack are so crappy. Like Eternal Witness, you never want to kill that guy after they've played one. You know what I mean?
Unless you think if he casts Natural Order, I just can't win, and his deck is set up so it wants to cast Natural Order in the majority of its games.
Right. All those things worth considering. Practice. Just keep playing the deck and realizing the sorts of cards you can draw and what sorts of options you have in terms of planning a line of play.
And all of these decisions that we've talked about up to this point are really why we enjoy the format so much, because Magic is just about making decisions with information to a lot of people that play it at a competitive level. This next section, we'll talk about what some of those cards that you'll be making decisions with are, and introduce you to possibly 2 and 3 card combos that have obscene power that you didn't even realize exist. Since 100 card pulls from all of these sets across Magic's history, there are tons of card combinations. Some of them that are more resilient don't even require a creature or a permanent to stay on the battlefield. The best actually don't require permanents on the battlefield or use your graveyard, permanents or spells from the graveyard, because those are pretty easy to interact with. AJ and I are just going to kind of rapid fire through these, because if we talk about each one in depth too much, like, you're going to be here for way longer than you want to be.
Yeah.
So I'll start. Good combination. Rebels and non-traditional rebel creatures to tutor out. So the rebels that you're going to be playing are ones like Lin Civi or Amru Scout from Time Spiral Block, where they search your library for other rebels. And then you can find something like Chameleon Colossus, which is just an obscenely large creature that rebels weren't designed to find. Skyshroud Poacher, which finds a bunch of elves, gives effects that rebels don't normally get. Or something like Mirror Entity, that just turns every creature that you have, including all the rebels that found it, into very large threats.
So another one is, this is kind of a classic one, Thopter, Foundry, and Sword of the Meek. Both of them are artifacts. Both of them can be Tezzerated out. Both of them, well, the Sword of the Meek in particular can it be Trinket Maged?
No, it's a 2 mana.
Maged, but it can be, you can...
Muddled.
Yeah, you can muddle for it, muddle the mixture. It can die, and then you can get it back. That's a pretty good example of...
Or you can discard it and get it back.
Yeah, and the color that Thopter Foundry is in is the color... Those are probably the colors you want to be playing if you're playing the combo.
And then one of my favorites is Goblin Charbelcher and Mana Severance, with, even though being a total of 9 mana to cast Mana Severance, remove all your lands, then cast Charbelcher and activate it to kill your opponent if you have at least as many cards in your deck as they have life points. Does not require anything to be in your graveyard or in play at the resolution of the Charbelcher. Wonderful.
So, then there's Tezzeret and any number of other artifact combos besides Thopter Foundry and Sword of the Meek. And we can list some of those later, but Tezzeret is great because he's a Planeswalker, and all Planeswalkers are just awesome. And there are any number of different artifacts you can abuse that don't necessarily play into the combo. So you can find mana sources, for instance, if you need to, and other things.
Yeah, he's a very versatile, like almost one-card combo given enough time. Something that requires the graveyard would be like a Buried Alive or Gerard's Orders for the card Genesis. And you just put Genesis in your graveyard. You either find some creature that you can get an effect out of and it goes to your graveyard, or just find some good creatures and put it in your graveyard, and then you have a very mana-intensive but powerful set of interactions.
There's the card Congregation at Dawn from the original Ravnica block, which gives you a number of different options. One of an option that doesn't necessarily require a huge commitment in your deck is a chain of Cascade cards. So you could find Bloodbraid Elf into Shardless Agent into some 2-drop, or alternatively, you could find Enlisted Worm into Bloodbraid Elf into Sharded Agent.
Into whatever card happens to happen, yeah.
Yeah, and now there's also that, what is it, from Plane Chase? There's that,
Maelstrom.
Drop Rug guy. He cascades.
Whoa!
Haven't that guy cast yet.
I want to see that card get cast. Something that's kind of funny, this is a little bit specific, but it could be any sort of card that is like a Prodigal Sorcerer. Goblin Sharpshooter, and giving it Death Touch. And the cards Basilisk Caller and Nightshade Peddler both seem very playable as Death Touch granting options.
Yeah, I can't even fathom goblins having access to those things. It makes me really sad that goblins can just combo off and keep all of your creatures off the board. Another one that's been played for a while in Classic is Helm of Obedience and Leyline of the Void, and now there's also the option including Rest in Peace, the recent Graveyard Hate card. These combos are pretty good because Leyline, I guess if you're lucky, can come into play at the beginning of the game. Rest in Peace is pretty cheap. Helm is an artifact. And all of them also screw up your opponent's graveyard interactions.
Yeah, so you get some residual value just by casting half of the combo.
Yeah.
The combinations from Classic are probably going to litter this list, because another one that I can think of is just Oath of Druids and either Forbidden Orchard to make your opponent have a creature, or probably just them having a creature by their own. And then you find whatever stupid large creatures that you probably can't cast in your deck.
Yeah. Painter's Servant and Grindstone is another good one. Both artifact pieces. Grindstone can be Trinket Maged. Painter's Servant can be Imperial Recruited. Sometimes you can take advantage of Painter's Servant in other ways and play, I don't know, Washout or
Pyroblast, yeah.
Whatever. So that just mills out your opponent.
I guess it's probably worth noting that I will also include a list of all of these little combos under the podcast, so you don't have to just figure out what we're saying, and you can read what the cards do. So another combo it's kind of like a couple combos, but they all basically do the same thing, and that is make infinite creatures. Either Kiki Jiki with Pestermite, Village Bell, Ringer, Restoration Angel, Deceiver Exarch, or Splinter Twin on any of the non-Restoration Angel targets. And assuming that your creatures don't die, you just continue tapping and untapping them, and then attack your opponent for as many points of damage as you want to.
So then we've got, this was popular in Modern, I don't know if it still is, I don't think it is, but Melira Pod. You could find a Melira Sylvak Outcast combo with any number of persist creatures in a sacrifice outlet. And so the idea is that your sacrifice should generate some kind of value. With Kitchen Finks, you can gain a bunch of life, or with Murderous Redcap, you can hopefully kill your opponent.
Yeah. There's also something that was mentioned in Slug's article, which is linked below. And it's pretty simple, but requires a decent amount of mana investment. And that's just casting Upheaval, and then having mana afterward to cast another card. So it's like you restart the game, and you have a permanent in play. And
it's like Chandelar, essentially. Your
yeah.
opponent has begun the game with Mahamodi-Jin in play, and you start at 11 life.
Hopefully the permanent that you're starting the game with isn't a Fire Drake, though.
Yeah. And all of your lands are Cities of Brass.
So the next combo is actually one of your, maybe not favorite, but most played.
It's definitely my favorite. So there was, for a while, just a dedicated Scapeshift deck. It was essentially rug colored, but occasionally splashed.
Black or white.
Yeah. And it just tries to get 7 lands out, and then Scapeshift for Valakut and 5 mountains. And the idea is, if your opponent
is 5 mountains or 6 mountains?
You need to find 6.
Yeah, okay.
Because but then your opponent takes 18. And 18 is normally pretty good to kill them. If you have more lands out, you can deal more damage. I decided at some point that it's better just to have a Burning Wish and look for Scape Shift, since it costs 6 mana total to use anyway to do that. And that way, you don't have to feel obligated to play Scape Shift all the time.
And you don't accidentally draw Scape Shift when it doesn't do anything that is worth paying 4 mana for.
Right.
Another fun interaction involves Rest in Peace also, so this is kind of a shoe-in for the Helm of Obedience deck, or at least a consideration. And it's been seeing some play in Legacy. Energy Field. You have Rest in Peace in play in Energy Field, you take no damage because your Energy Field will never go to your graveyard unless they actually have a way to kill it.
Yeah, so if your opponent's playing blue-white, you better keep a hold of all your enchantment removal, essentially.
Yes. Basically, you want to interact with enchantments and artifacts if your opponent's playing blue-white.
Right. Moat and Humility is another one, and these are both white cards, and they're both enchantments, which I guess means they're the hardest permanent to remove. I would go so far to say.
Yeah, I would say that too.
And, Moat and Humility isn't the end of the world, except you're probably going to lose. You just need to be able to interact with those cards too somehow.
If your way to kill...
on its own feels like it wins.
Yeah, Moat's almost a one-card combo. But Moat and Humility, if your only way to deal with enchantments is creatures, then you better be able to burn your opponent out or something, because you're not going to attack for the win once they have a Moat and a Humility in play.
Well, this next one's a really good Goblin one. I'm excited for you to get to this one.
The next combo is the mainstay of the Goblins deck, and it's actually so powerful that it got banned in Legacy. Goblin Recruiter and Goblin Ringleader. So with Goblin Recruiter, you stack your deck with however many Goblin cards you want, preferably at least 4, the top of them being Goblin Ringleader, and then you draw and you either cheat or cast the Ringleader and draw a bunch of disgusting goblins, and then your opponent dies shortly thereafter.
Probably that turn. So I guess this is a combo. Natural Order is almost a one-card combo.
It feels like a one-card combo.
Yeah, you find a green dude. There are a couple of green dudes to look for. Primeval Titan is a good one, but it's not really an automatic win most of the time. You want to look for, what are the viable cards? There's Progenitus, which is extremely hard to remove.
That's like the most resilient target.
Yeah, and so you hopefully just win the game in 2 turns after that. There is, like I said, Primeval Titan, which is just another flexible option.
Which is interesting.
Oh, go ahead.
Primeval Titan's interesting because a card like Primeval Titan, you can actually count on casting if you draw it. So you don't have to run the risk of drawing the Progenitus.
There's also Terastodon and Woodfall Primus. Terastodon can be an aggressive option if you really need to race, because you can give yourself 18 points of power and basically go all in on it.
Or you can deal with a problem permanent.
Yeah,
or
definitely. Several
of them. And then something that if you are in danger of dying, that has recently come to Magic Online, is Elder Scale Worm. And I believe that this was Palaka Worm for a long time.
Yeah, we decided that was the tutor target, but now it's changed, because whatever deck the Palaka Worm was good against, we are pretty sure that Elder Scale Worm almost just single-handedly wins the game.
Yeah. And then the last combo that we're going to mention before we wrap up with kind of a look at the past metagame and a probable or possible metagame to come is the Hermit Druid combo deck, which is Hermit Druid and no basic lands in your deck. So you pay 1 green, mill your whole deck, or I guess you can play Cephalid Illusionist and some sort of 0 mana targeted ability that you can use over and over, like is it called Encore? The tribe?
Isn't it Nomads in Core?
Yeah, but I mean, there's a ton of in-core creatures that have the 0 prevent, and you can mill your whole deck with that, or a Shuko, and you just equip it to the Illusionist over and over and over, and mill your deck 3 cards at a time.
Yeah.
So you mill your entire deck, and then you have a Dread Return in your graveyard. You hopefully have at least 3 creatures in play.
You have a Narc Amoeba, and what I've recently been seeing, what Slug360 did against me when he did it was...
Bloodghast?
Sold.
He what? Oh, Lingering Soul. That's smart.
So Bloodghast is also an option.
Yeah, so you get a couple ways to get creatures from your graveyard into play. And Tarmatog has, as we mentioned earlier, a bit of an introduction to what this core could look like in his article that's linked below.
Yeah, and so then they dread return something that kills you immediately. Which did you mention this? I guess you
No, I
already
did
did.
not.
It's probably the Mimeoplasm and what is it, Lord of Extinction,
Yeah,
and
and Murderous Redcap.
or depending on what the situation is, also Giant Solifuge.
Yeah, which is funny. I never thought I'd see Giant Solifuge being played again in
Be
Magic.
like a 43-42 or 43-40 attacker. Yeah, it's pretty devastating.
Alright, so on to the metagame. So the last time that 100 card singleton was played competitively, or semi-competitively, however you want to look at that, was February of 2011, and I've included a link that takes you to the most recent, term used loosely, scare quotes as AJ would say, deck lists. Unfortunately, their names aren't very accurate, but you can get an idea of what the actual card lists that people were playing and performing with look like, which gives you kind of a good springboard to take and edit, like we talked about at the beginning of this.
Now, as I understand it, those daily events and those last tournaments were shortly after a banned and restricted update in 2011, right?
Yes, which, if I remember, the more substantial changes were no divoting top, no survival of the fittest.
And no Mind Twist.
Yeah,
too.
no mind twist. Do you remember any of the other changes?
I don't recall any of the other major changes. I think those might have been the big three that
Yeah.
affected the format.
I agree too.
Later, then in March of 2012, this is long after any events had fired, Wizards updated the banned and restricted list, much to our confusion, but pleasure actually, by banning Stoneforge Mystic, which was probably good in any deck that could
Yeah.
possibly support it.
Which I know that some people, including both Travis and Zimbardo, who have written a lot on the format, don't agree with, but any deck that has Aladdin's Call probably wanted to have Stoneforge Mystic.
Can I say the word bullshit on our
You
podcast?
just did. That's
well,
bullshit.
Stoneforge Mystic is total bullshit.
Oh. I thought you were going to say that viewpoint was.
No.
And something...
Well, no. I mean, not the card. I mean, yeah, that Stoneforge Mystic is insane, is what
Yeah.
I'm trying to say.
Yeah. But something that also is kind of neat about this banned and restricted list update is a card was unbanned. Which...
Regrowth.
Yeah. Which I don't even know if I want to play that in very many decks these days.
It's like demonic tutor for whatever you've already done. So, like, I mean, it's not that much. It's probably worse than Eternal Witness a lot of the time.
Yes, much worse.
And now there's a new regrowth that exiles itself, right? It's black-green.
Yeah, there are a lot of cards that are like almost regrowths, so it's not that interesting.
Right. A couple cards that, I mean, maybe this is a future topic largely, but we could talk about other cards that potentially should be banned or unbanned.
Yeah.
One card that I think should be unbanned is Imperial Seal, which I'm not even sure is all that playable all the time. I think I would probably run it a lot of the time.
The majority of black, yeah.
But
it's not the same as Vampiric Tutor at all.
Mystical Tutor is better, and I think Worldly Tutor might be better.
Yeah, being able to draw the card and not have your opponent know about the fact that you're setting up your draw is pretty valuable.
Yeah.
And another card that we should probably talk about at some point, if we decide to do another one of these and discuss the banned and restricted list, is if Life from the Loam and Crucible of Worlds are banned because we don't want to see Wasteland or Tectonic Edge recursion.
Yeah.
Does Dust Bowl have a spot?
I mean, this is interesting, right? Dust Bowl is basically like Crucible of Worlds. only it's a land.
Yeah.
Here's the thing about Dust Bowl, though. Since it can only target non-basics, it really rewards somebody who plays a lot of basics. And I feel like non-basic hate is allowed, like Wizards allows non-basic hate to stay in formats because it always wants to encourage not only budget players, but just players at large to be able to play a bunch of basic lands.
Yeah, and non-basics are pretty good these days with Celestial Colonnade and stuff like that.
Yeah, so Dust
But
Bowl staying in the format maybe it shifts the metagame. People will start playing 1 or 2 color decks with fewer non-basics.
I could add some choice words to this, but not now. Not now. So a lot of sets have come out since February 2011. The first set is Mirrodin Besiege. I'll let AJ list his favorite card from this set, and then I'll list mine. We're just going to kind of go through all the sets and then list one card that wasn't in a 100 card as of the last known metagame.
Oh, so my favorite card from the set? I would definitely go so far as to say Treasure Mage. Not the best, but pretty good.
Do you like it because of the artwork?
I like it because of the artwork, and because any deck I want to run Treasure Mage, I think I also want to run Trinket Mage, and I like to think of them as brothers.
So I think that probably the duh card to mention from the set is Green Sun Zenith, which got banned in Modern because how much variance it took out of the format.
Do we want to go over and list other relevant cards, though?
I'm going to provide a list of a bunch of cards to attach to this podcast so we don't have to spend the listeners' time. But yeah, you can look at a bunch of interesting cards under the podcast from all the sets that have come out since February 2011. So new Phyrexia. I think that Phyrexian Metamorph... can't talk. Phyrexian Metamorph is pretty sick. I think that AJ would agree because he played Clone. Yeah. And I just wanted to take the card that I was pretty sure he was going to say. So, what do you like, AJ?
I'm pretty sure Metamorph should be in almost every deck. I can't think of a 100-card Singleton deck that shouldn't run Metamorph, unless you need to play no creatures in your deck because of some kind of Oath or Polymorph combo or something.
Yeah, it'd be like an Oath style deck, or just a deck that doesn't want to play any creatures, like one of the control combo decks.
Yeah, and so I guess the card I'll name, I was bordering on naming Beast Within because it's a cool, flexible removal spell or combat trick. Modal. Freaking hate Batterskull, but I'll leave all those aside, and I will name Birthing Pod, the quote-unquote, again, scare quotes, I guess, new Survival of the Fittest, which I guess it's more like Survival of the Fittest plus Hibernation's End. Yeah, you'll have to look that one up.
Good job naming 3 cards. So also, there have been a couple special set releases. The first one being the Commander decks.
Yeah, so this actually provided a lot of interesting, albeit narrow, cards.
Yeah.
And maybe more that we don't even have on the list below could make it.
We've already mentioned Mimeoplasm.
Yeah, so we'll skip that one. I know what the most powerful card is that I think you should name, but I'm going to name Damia, Sage of Stone, because it's an interesting card draw option that can be natural ordered, or what's the name of the pact? Pact of
Summoner's Pact.
Though I can't imagine a situation in which you'd want to do that.
And then AJ left the boring but very important Scavenging Ooze, which might just be better than Tarmogoyf.
It's insane. That card is nuts.
So then there's also been 2 core sets. The first, which is Magic 2012. This is kind of a boring core set for me. AJ?
So, man, I'm looking at this list of cards. I guess Phantasmal Image is the obvious include here. Phantasmal Image is really good. It's not as good in 100 card as you might expect, because there actually are a number of effects that have multiple targets.
But there are also a lot of creatures that come into play and do something.
Like Whipcorder. When Whipcorder is just off your Phantasmal Image, it's much less exciting.
I think that 2012 is interesting because it gives really the first of... Well, not the first. I guess that Batterskull is probably the first. But one of the first disgusting 5-drops to consider in this new slew of sets, and that is Garruk Primal Hunter.
Screw that guy. He screwed up all of my curves originally, and he's impossible to cast.
Okay, so moving on to Innistrad. This is a pretty sick set. My favorite card is probably Gavany Township, which... I like playing decks that have way too many creatures, and it is a land that makes all of your creatures better.
So I always like creatures with enter the battlefield effects, and even though it's probably not the best card on this list, or in the set, I would name Fiend Hunter.
That card, you're asking to blow yourself out as much as you blow them out.
You target your own guy, What about that 3/2 that kills a werewolf? Think he's good?
No.
Flame
But
tongue for white.
but Innistrad of course has the enemy colored um, M10 lands like Hinterland, Harbor, Isolated Chapel, and Snapcaster Mage, which I'm sure that people will not forget. Something funny that's come out is the collated Mercadian Masks block, which we've already talked about Dust Bowl, so
Yeah.
we won't hit that. I'm sure that AJ was trying to figure out some card that has Cage in the name. I don't know if you ever figured it out, but trust me, it's bad. You don't want to know what it is.
It has gorillas in the artwork, I think.
It like makes 2/2 ape
Remember
tokens
what it's really bad.
equal to the converted mana cost of like a creature that comes into play, the next creature that comes into play. AJ, what would you say that
You go first because I feel like it's cheating for me to go first since there's really only one card we have left to name here. And it's not Rashadenport, even though that's here.
So it's probably Lin Civi.
What about Tanglewire? I don't see that here.
I forgot that card existed because I don't own any. So
I
there
don't
are a
play
lot
that
of
card. We're against it.
Tanglewire might actually be playable in a 100 card. Like it might even be good in mono red.
For the really irritating card to pull out, there's Submerge.
Yes.
That card's pretty good, actually.
Ooh, I forgot there's Misdirection too. There's a lot of weird little neat cards in Masks block. There are also a lot of weird little unplayable cards.
Yeah, there are cards that border on playable because they do weird stuff, like Vine Dryad, Sky Shroud Cutter. You just wish that they did something, but instead you play them for free, and they just do nothing.
Birthing pod. So after Masks is Dark Ascension, which I'm sure most people are familiar with because it is one of the more recent standard sets. I will go ahead and say that probably my favorite card from this set for 100 card is just a boring mono red, red green, red aggressive, lots of creature card, Hell Rider, which ends the game incredibly quickly.
So I'm gonna cheat and name two cards again because I
No.
want to play these in the same deck with each other, and that's Dungeon Geist and Huntmaster of the Fells. I just love Enter the Battlefield dudes. 4-drop.
Yeah, so it's funny, we just named a bunch of 4-drops, but it's definitely harder to cut 5-drops than 4-drops. We'll get to that
Sorin,
again.
so a 4-drop.
What?
Sorin, Lord of Innistrad.
Yeah, is that guy even playable?
I don't think there's a Planeswalker that isn't playable in 100 card, but there are definitely some that might be worse than creatures.
And then, like, the next set is just an interesting set. Avacyn Restored, because I'm pretty sure that Miracles change 100 card a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's mostly just because of Mystical Tutor. And Personal Tutor is now playable because of Miracles.
There are any number of cards that I want to name
Yeah.
from here. So you get to pick one first.
Okay, well, I'm just going to go ahead and list off Terminus, Entreat the Angels, and Bonfire of the Damned, which are the miracles that I was talking about. And then I'll take out a couple 5-drops, so AJ doesn't have... Or maybe you're going to just be mad.
No, you just go ahead.
Zealous Conscripts, Sigarda, Host of Herons, Wolfir Silverheart, Tamio the Moon Sage. Like, all fantastic 5-drops. Some of them can be tutored for with creature tutors, or like Green Sun Zenith. A Planeswalker that can defend itself. Wolfir Silverheart is basically a creature and a piece of equipment. I mean, and they're all 5-drops, which we already have a hard time cutting down.
So I'll name. Well, Triumph of Ferocity has the best art, obviously.
Obviously.
But Druid's Familiar, I actually think is an interesting option. I like this card because I never know when I should play it. 4-drop, you can Imperial Recruit it, and it turns your Imperial Recruiter into a relevant creature.
Yeah.
So maybe that's just a circular Ouroboros from hell of bad cards. But alternatively, getting a 4/4 for 4 that makes some other guy big ends the game very, very quickly.
I have to say that a trend in these sets, as people have discussed, just the creatures are so much better now than what they used to be.
Even what they were like 2 years ago.
I know, like, can you imagine Restoration Angel in Alara block? I can't.
I don't even want to.
So then there's another special set, Plane Chase 2012. I only have 2 cards listed for us to possibly say, but there are lots of them.
There are actually some interesting cards. Not that horned Minotaur artifact guy. Cascade bounce himself, dude.
The 6-drop.
Like a spider that's decent. There are actually a number of weird options that seem like totally fringe playable.
Yeah, the big ones are clearly Baleful Strix and Shardless Agent. Not really a lot to say on those two. Magic 2013, another ton of...
The home of 5-drops again.
5-drops, 6-drops, 7-drops, whatever. Like, Thragtusk and Thundermaw Hellkite have very interesting applications. Thragtusk is like one of the ultimate defensive cards for obvious reasons, and then Thundermaw, AJ thinks of it as a Planeswalker assassin.
Man.
Yeah, I think is an accurate way to think of it, because if they don't have a removal spell, it should be able to connect with a Planeswalker.
Yeah, let's just go ahead and move on from there.
Yeah, that's a pretty boring set. There's lots of, like, Elder Scale Worm we talked about.
Yeah, there's plenty of stuff. Ravnica just came out, though.
Yeah, and Ravnica, lots of cards should see play from Return to Ravnica in a 100 card.
I've been Supreme Verdict in testing, I'll tell you that much. But then again, I've also been Terminus.
Well,
within 3 turns of one another.
I think that Deathrite Shaman will just be like another Birds of Paradise, only not quite as consistent, obviously. But it has additional value.
So I thought that Blasphemous Act was really good, actually, in like a rug-style board control deck. But now Mizium Mortars is available, which is certainly better than Flame Wave. I'll say that much.
Yeah, man. I'm sure that everyone is familiar with the good cards in Return to Ravnica.
Yeah.
They're still good in a 100 card, too. And then, as we mentioned, so many good 5-drops. And
this was not the case in the beginning of 2011.
Yeah, because the 5-drops were pretty much like Baneslayer, Angel, Bribery, Primal Command. Blue had a lot of 5-drops, but beyond that, other colors weren't playing very many.
Yeah. I guess there's like Arcslogger, Acidic Slime. So there are things that but they were never very exciting or game-changing most of the time. Bribery was an example. I always wanted to play Bribery. You just play it as a creature.
Yeah, and Arcslogger was like a card, if you untap with it, you usually win the game.
Yeah,
but
everything's changed now. And when I went back and we've been reconfiguring like a red, blue, green rug mid-range creature-based deck, you want to include like 10 5-drops now, and your curve just sucks. And so you have to make these cuts or make tempo sacrifices, and it's just very unclear what to do.
Hopefully we'll be able to figure that out before the first pre, or maybe the first pre will shed some light on what 5-drops make the cut.
Or maybe I just don't run anything below 5-drops anymore. I just only run 5-drops. 100 of them.
So, based on all of these cards, AJ and I have been updating some lists. I've mostly been taking tried and true archetypes. Like I have a slightly updated Dark Bant. I've updated Elves. Looking at Mono Blue, a fellow named Super Chevalier, I think was his name, would play Mono Blue in a lot of the premier events. Always do really well. And then I've been building from scratch, kind of like a Naya LD deck. And I also have made a Goblins list that looks insanely powerful and is 40 tickets about.
Yeah, and remember, Goblins is not boring to play.
Yeah, like, it's actually really hard to play because you get to make a lot of decisions that you don't realize if you just watch replays of it.
Yeah.
And the decisions are interesting and kind of hard to make.
And of course, sometimes the one thing that players may not like about playing Goblins or a budget version of Goblins, even though it's not that budgeted, essentially, like 40 tickets still gets you like really good deck. You just have fewer options in terms of dual lands and stuff. Really.
Yeah, it's just one color, doesn't play fetch lands, doesn't have Mutavault, and then is missing like the big red mythics and rares from Standard.
Yeah, but what's the only frustrating thing to potentially pilot a deck like that is that if your opponent has access to sideboard hate and is able to implement it early, there's very little way to deal with that.
Yeah.
So though it's effective, I would the reason people sideboard against mono red goblins or just mono red aggro with a lot of burn is because it's really threatening and can kill very quickly. It It's that like sometimes you feel helpless after sideboarding.
One of the best cards against goblins, Fear of Law. I've actually seen E-Hustle beat through that and other mono red hate at the same point because some of the cards are just so powerful.
Yeah. Like once, what's the name of the boar from Shadowmoor? The boar rider.
Bortusk Liege?
Yeah, that guy makes things really tough. Vexing Shusher. They're just a bunch of cool cards that you have access to.
And what have you been working on, AJ?
I've I don't know. So I'm just trying to make this red, blue, green mid-range deck good again. And the last time I seriously played it was when it had access to Survival of the Fittest and Sendai's Dividing Top. And so in a version like that, you have a variety of different win cons, which are all incredibly powerful. One of which is Scape Shift, and then another which is Survival of the Fittest, into basically just accruing a ton of advantage and finding whatever creatures you need.
It's also Natural Order, right?
Yeah, the deck runs Natural Order too, and it ran a Bribery. It basically just tried to double up on as many powerful win cons as it possibly could. And then it had Mystical Tutor, and it didn't at the time have Personal Tutor, probably should have. But since Survival of the Fittest and Sensei's Dividing Top were banned, the deck's just a lot harder to build, I think. You have to play it in a more focused way rather than the controlling route, or if you play the controlling route, you have to change basically what your creature base is. And I haven't figured out how to make it work just yet. Certainly playable, and it's really fun, because basically you just play the best red, blue, and green creatures ever, and just top deck them, and 2-for-1 your opponent always. I've been looking at some sort of graveyard deck that tries to make Corpse Dance really good, or tries to be able to power out something. I'm not sure to make it blue-black or maybe Grixis colored. But there are some different options with weird tutor effects that are really powerful and can win the game quickly. Insidious Dreams is a really high-risk, high-reward card that has the potential just to blow out your opponent at the beginning of your 5th turn. I don't know. So
AJ has an ongoing affair with Shallow Grave, and it comes up from time to time across all formats. I think this is one of those times.
My favorite cards, really. It is fun to Shallow Grave a Primeval Titan. I'll just say that much.
So AJ and I are looking forward. I don't know if we'll get it up before the first player run event, but we will have some show matches that we'll play and record, and maybe do some gunslinging, although we need to schedule it.
Maybe what we'll do is actually see which decks do well in the first tournament and try to put them against each other.
Yeah, that could be also. That might actually even be better, because our brains, they are broken. And we're hoping to bring more 100-card content to help support these events. So if you guys have any suggestions, or you think that something like this would be helpful, possibly with other topics, let us know.